I know there's so much we could talk about. It feels short on time. We wanted to get you as much information as we could. I'm pleased to present our next speaker, Barry Babcock. I'll let him tell you about himself, but I've seen Barry speak at many advocacy events, many environmental events, whether that's for wild rice or for water or for deer or for bear or for wolves. And I think probably most of the people in this room have also heard him speak. So I'm happy to introduce Barry Babcock. Thank you.
Well, thank you, but I have to say something here first, draw attention to somebody in the audience, or it'd be remiss. In Minnesota, one person has probably been more responsible than any other group of people for keeping this issue alive, and it's been a real struggle since wolves were delisted in 2012. And I'm sure you all know her name and who she is, but Maureen Hackett, who's in the audience here, she's the founder of Howling for Wolves, and she pretty much single-handedly has kept us all going. So I just would like, maybe for those who don't know her, she's got her hand right there, and if you have a chance, Maureen has a AAA personality, so if you got a chance, she'd like to talk to you. She's got a lot to say. I've really kind of honored to be here. My personal hero is Alda Leopold. I first saw a book, well, I got into nature reading back in about 1967. I think it was in 1968, and I can remember the bookstore. I was perusing through some nature ratings, and I saw a book there with a sketch of some geese, 3 geese on the cover. It was called A Sand County Almanac, and I picked it up and read the book, and I've never been the same since. It turned my life around. And I'm here I am in his backyard, and I sense, from what I've heard all morning here today, I sense his spirits in this room, and I hope to evoke that spirit a little more here in my talk today. I want to open up and first tell you about a close encounter of the third kind I had with a wolf. I believe it was in October of 2008. In fact, the International Wolf Center, which I'm not a real fan of, but they wrote a story about it. It was in their summer issue, I believe it was. If you Googled my name, International Wolf Center, it would come up in a PDF file. But I was out grouse hunting, and that's who I am. I'm an avid hunter. I've been hunting deer for over a half a century. I've hunted ducks, small game. All I hunt now is deer. I'm an archer. I make my own arrows. I fletch my own arrows and tie my own strings, and I shoot an old wooden stick bow that's as old as I am. And you got a sense of how old I am if I tell you that I've been hunting deer for over a half a century. So I've got a perspective. And I live in north central Minnesota in that Bemidji area. I've been a legal resident of Beltrami, Hubbard, and Cass County at different times during my life. According to the DNR and U.S. Forest Service game managers right now tell us that the highest wolf density in Minnesota is right in that area where I live, between Grand Rapids and Bemidji, Walker, those towns you're probably familiar with. We've always had wolves in Minnesota. It was down to a population of 750 in 1970. And I've always, as a hunter, I've always been fascinated by wolves. We had wolves around in that Bemidji area. But if somebody would catch a wolf in a coyote trap, it was so unusual it'd make the front page of the Bemidji Pioneer paper. Deer hunting was really tough in the 60s, 70s, and in the 80s. And we, per se, didn't have a viable population of wolves in that part of the state then. Those 750 wolves were pretty much restricted to those 5 northeastern counties. And that was because of the Boundary Waters Canoe Area, non-motorized wilderness area. In fact, the Wilderness Act in 1978, it was still really wild before that. No roadless area. And although we never lost our wolves in Minnesota, it had nothing to do with anything that we did as people. The reason we had wolves is because we have enough wild lands where these wolves could find refuge. Judge Burl Hall, in her decision to relist the wolf in December of 2014, cited in her 111-page report how Minnesota has always been a wolf-killing state, and right up to when wolves were protected. And that's the reason why we were able to maintain wolves. And although we must continue this fight to keep the wolves listed, to keep from hunting them again, We need to look at the big picture because reason why, just as I mentioned, why we had those wolves in Minnesota is we've got these wild lands left. Those are what's best about America. It's best about what's about being an American. To preserve these lands is in essence, will preserve these unique animals, and not just animals, but our animals and plant communities. So it's really imperative that we keep that in mind. In Minnesota, we are fortunate. There's over 4.5 million acres of land in our state forest system. It's the second largest state forest system in the nation, second behind Alaska. We have nearly 3 million acres in two national forests, Superior and Chippewa. We have our state parks and state trails, but we also have millions of acres in what they call these county administrated lands. These tax forfeit lands, that when the state was gridded up, surveyed, they formed counties, and these counties had all this land that was no value in it for agriculture. So it went back to the state, and in order to maintain these, keep them public lands, the state has these PILT payments, payment in lieu of taxes that they make to the counties, that subsidizes them in the place of taxes. So although we do hear a lot of county commissioners ranting and raving and we got too many public lands, particularly lands under their jurisdiction, which euphemistically is referred to as tax forfeit lands, they complain about them and threaten to privatize them, but very few of them are going to move because they're going to lose out on those PILT payments, the state that reimburses them. It keeps them public. And plus, these lands, these public lands, vast public lands, are the goose that lays the golden egg. They're what bring people up in northern Minnesota for bird watching, to enjoy wildlife. I think it was in the winter of 2004 and 05. We talk about what a big thing motorized recreation is. Well, there was more income in northern Minnesota by people that were traveling into the state to see these owl eruptions. I don't know if you remember those. You had them here in Wisconsin too, the great gray owls, the hawk owls, the boreal owls. I remember driving over to my sister's home here in northwestern Wisconsin and seeing busloads of people on State Highway 200 through the heart of northern Minnesota. They were from Germany, Austria, Australia, South Africa, just to see these owls. And so, I mean, these public lands are really important. We must always keep that big picture in mind. And as I think about Aldo Leopold, his genius was in his essay, The Land Ethic. And Aldo Leopold just wasn't a nature writer. I mean, and this is in my opinion, he was one of the great philosophers in American history. He connected the dots, the environmental dots. He moved us ahead. We haven't moved much since Sand County Almanac come out. In fact, we've been losing some ground. But he set us on the direction how to live, how to survive, how to recognize ourselves as not being apart from the biotic community, but being part of that. And he said in the end of his chapter on the land ethic, he makes it very, very succinct when he says that the solution is we have to quit thinking about terms and economics when it comes to the land. That a thing is right when we preserve the beauty, the integrity, and the stability of the biotic community. A thing is wrong when it tends otherwise. He highlighted ethics. And that's what's so sorely missed today amongst our resource managers from the county to the state to the federal level. I have a friend who's a retired wildlife regional manager in Minnesota. And he would tell me about how over the past 30 years or so, the DNR would be a balance, a 50-50 kind of politics in natural resource protection, where today it's more like 80-20 or 90-10, where politics is ruling the day. And, you know, whether we're talking about protecting wolves or non-ferrous sulfide mining or pipelines or unsustainable logging, the core problem, the core issue we're facing is the same thing. It's that we have removed ourselves from the environment. We see ourselves as living apart from it. Leopold said that it's the same thing that comes out of Native American communities and their spiritual beliefs, that both said it in a different way. We're dependent on all the plant and animal communities to sustain us. There's an interesting analogy. I live in Indian country, right? Red Lake, Leech Lake, and White Earth reservations. And my Indian friends tell me that how pathetic we are. We were the last ones created, that we depend on all other life forms for sustenance. None of them depend on us. So, I mean, if you think about it, if there was an election held today, we'd be voted out. I mean, there'd be no question about it. I hear so much BS about what's going on in northern Minnesota about wolves. This delisting thing, when it took place in 2012, and I might just back up to in 2011, I was having some intimations with my own soul that maybe a highly regulated hunt on wolves would be a good thing, that it would assuage this anti-wolf fervor. And it wasn't that bad in Minnesota. In fact, Rob Drieslein, the editor of Outdoor News, wrote in a commentary some years ago, I wish I'd saved it, but I remember it very well. If people who know me will tell you I got a good memory. But he mused in there how he was on a plane with a bunch of other outdoor writers. And Rob Drieslein is the editor of Outdoors News, the most widely read sportsman's publication in Minnesota. And he talked about that on that plane, and all these sports writers from western states like Montana, Idaho, Wyoming, all rumbling about wolves and that more than likely they're going to be, the problems we're going to have sustaining our game populations. And he mused in there about how in Minnesota, it's a non-issue. Because, I don't know, it was because we always had wolves. See, when the wolves were delisted, I think the estimated population was 3,200 or 3,400. Arguably, there was as many or more wolves in Minnesota than there was in all the other wolf states combined in the lower 48. Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, Wisconsin, and Michigan. And I mean, I wasn't even hearing anything. There was nothing in Outdoor News, no anti-wolf per se. I mean, Minnesotans had pretty much accepted wolves. We didn't hear a lot coming from farmers. It was like a dead issue. And he said this, and he even tried to intimate that to some of these sports writers. It's not going to be no big deal. It's not going to affect anything. When they delisted the wolves, or when rumblings were coming about, I started hearing all these, like what I like to call the KKK of the wolf world. They were coming out of the woodwork, and that includes our northern legislators who happen to be almost all Democrats. I call especially on the Iron Range, we call them the Iron Range Mafia. They hate wolves. I mean, they're talking in legislative session about coming into people's backyards and the danger of them snatching their children. And then the same thing with these hunters, and like on your slide display about wolves being in the crosshairs, and these guys with cattle. I think that up through 2011, the highest documented by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service incidents of documented wolf issues on farms in northern Minnesota was just 1.7%. And what's even more extraordinary about that is that we think, well, all the cattle in Minnesota are in western and southern Minnesota. No. Cattle country in northern Minnesota is in the north. Cass County, right in the heart of north central Minnesota, produces more calves every year than any other county in the state. More calves are produced in northern Minnesota than anywhere else in the state. So what I would say is an extraordinarily small number of livestock that are being impacted by wolves. To me, it ain't a big deal. I don't even know why these guys should be subsidized. A lot of these guys they let their cows go off in these wooded pastures and calve in February, March, or April. They don't go out there and watch them. I mean, let these cows drop calves in wooded, sheltered areas is asking for trouble. I mean, they should be penalized for being that damn stupid. I have two farmers that raise cattle, that both of them live within 1.5 miles of me. And the two of them combined, it's over 100 cows they have. One's got Charlene and the other's got Black Angus. They used to have sheep. And when the market dropped out on wool with the advent of this fleece, they went to cattle. And when they had sheep, there weren't that many wolves. It was mostly coyotes. And the wolves have pretty much knocked the coyotes out. They have not lost a cow. They have not lost a calf to a wolf. And they got game cameras out in their pastures, and sheep are going across them all the time. Well, I only got 5 minutes left here, but I want to touch on something I'd like you to keep in mind on this big picture thing. I always refer to the three-legged stool on this issue. And the three legs are, one is the DNR, the other one is the Minnesota Deer Hunters Association that only has a membership of 15,000 people out of 400,000 rifle hunters in Minnesota, and the other one is our northern legislators. They're the ones who are culpable for this wolf hunt in Minnesota. They even reclassified the wolf as a small game animal to circumvent this 5-year moratorium. And then everybody talks about the three-legged stool. Well, there's a seat on that stool. And what sits on that seat is what I call, remember President Eisenhower, his farewell speech? It was written by Malcolm Moose, the Recreation Military Industrial Complex. Military Industrial Complex. It used to be the Military Industrial Congressional Complex, but since he was giving it to Congress, he thought it'd be a good idea to take the Congress out of the title. What I would warn the American public today about protecting what's really precious, what do we love more about America than our national parks, our national forests, our public lands, the wildlife and plant communities that we have? This Waddell Martin thing was brought up earlier. I'm glad you brought that up. A fight that took place over some oysters in a river, I believe it was in Delaware, that said that wildlife is in the public domain. Nobody, whether it's on your private land, has domain over that wildlife. It belongs to the public. That's something that makes America different than European nations. Well, what I would warn us about is the recreation industrial, and I've added ag to that, recreation industrial ag complex. They sit on that stool. To them, the wolf is a problem. The wolf gets in the way. They don't want the wolf being an enlisted species, because it's not only going to get in the way for their land management practices, but like these sulfide mines and so forth that are popping up, that are looming in the future in Minnesota. So it's a recreation industrial ag complex. That's where we're fighting. Minnesota, the DNR had an online survey. 80% of the respondents did not want a wolf hunt. I think it was a Lakeland Public Research poll, had 80% of the public in Minnesota wants wolves hunted. Yet the DNR, our legislature, they've gone ahead with it. Our governor has approved it. Our Senator Amy Klobuchar is the author of one of these riders in the Senate that would would permanently delist the wolf again in the Great Lakes states. So this is an amount. This is going to be a long, long struggle. Like Aldo Leopold said, that we have to quit thinking about things in terms of economics. We got to start thinking that we're part of this biotic community. That we can't be waging war on an animal that belongs to be here. The wolf symbolizes so much to Americans, not just those of us in the Great Lakes states. It's a symbol of our wilderness. I just can't think of anything more important, right? And people tell me, well, why are you spending so much time on this wolf when we've got these other pressing issues that are jeopardizing our water and so forth? This thing with the wolf is something, if we can't overcome, we can't handle this. What can we handle out there? If we can't stop this hunt, what other environmental threat that we are facing can we handle? This is something that we've been dealing with. Is Europeans, coming from a European culture, from the early days of the development of agriculture and cultigens, that's what separated us. We have to come back again and embrace wildlife and our plant communities. Just one quick little analogy. Native Americans say that we're all related. That's no frivolous myth or anything. Science backs that up. You look at a molecule of chlorophyll and a molecule of red blood. Each of those is composed of 136 atoms arranged in a specific molecular structure. Of oxygen, hydrogen, nitrogen, and carbon. The only difference is in the center of the magnesium atom, or the chlorophyll atom, is an atom of magnesium. In the center of the blood molecule is an atom of iron. Switch the iron and the magnesium around, and red blood becomes chlorophyll and vice versa. That's proof that we're all related. I got the hook.
Questions for Barry? We got 10 minutes for questions. Okay. Wait.
Yeah, excuse me. You mentioned about mining and wolves and sulfide mining. What is that relationship with mining and wolves? I mean, and what I'm thinking about here is like the situation that we have in Wisconsin and up in northern Wisconsin, and how the people that are in office here are so anti-wolf. The state legislature, the governor. I mean, directly, how do wolves affect their ability to mine?
Well, if they're listed, they'll impact it. If they're listed, they could impact it. They could. But when I said that, I should have also added that what's happening with a lot of these projects now, like mining, they can waive the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, and the Threatened and Endangered Species Act under what they call the Weeks Act, where all of those come to play. They can waive those. But if they're not waived, and if the wolf is listed, they can affect an environmental review if it's going to impact the wolf populations in that area, because some of these mines are pretty extensive. I don't know how, one of these mines proposed in northern Minnesota, the Twin Metals mine, will be one of the second largest copper mine in North America. Only that proposed Pebble mine in Alaska would be larger. But I would like to add one thing is that all of these protections we have for the environment, the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, the Endangered Species Act, and other federal programs, have been greatly weakened. I think potentially the only viable environmental regulations and laws we have left in the United States are Indian treaties. I think those are the only ones right now that we really, the public can look to, is for really having some real viable protection for our environment, our Indian treaties. Because when these treaties, the 1837 treaty that affected Minnesota and Wisconsin, all the chiefs from all the tribes in Minnesota and Wisconsin were invited to that, and they made it real clear in the copious notes that were taken there, is that although they maintain the right to hunt, fish, and gather, they have to keep those waters and that land clean, or else they're not going to be able to get the commodities out of there that they want. If the waters are dirtied, they can't drink it, it'll affect the fish, and it'll affect the wild rice.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, I'm a journalist for a local newspaper, and I write a living wildlife column. And in a recent column, I wrote that the WWF, the World Wildlife Fund, has documented that 52% of all wildlife populations in fact, the volume of wildlife on the planet has been destroyed in 40 years, between 1970 and 2010. And we're 5 more years into it. And the 2 major causes of extinction on the planet are animal agriculture, which is covering over 50% of the land mass, and all global hunting as a major cause of extinction. And so my question to you is, I think, from all the studies I've done, is that we need the balance of the other 90% of the public who don't kill wildlife, who want to see wildlife, involved in our state and federal agencies, but they are not, because state agencies are structured on hunting, trapping, hounding licenses. There is no take or financial valuation for the non-hunting public to participate in funding. So that's been going on since the beginning. So all of our state agencies are basically killing businesses because the rest of us are shut out. We have no say because we don't pay into that system. And we actually do bring huge money to state tax coffers. Yeah, I would like to know how we can break in and direct the money that we bring to tax coffers, which is at least 3 times as much as hunters bring in licenses and to the tax coffers, and direct that money to have some power to balance out and participate. I mean, how much good could we do putting back in prairies and wetlands and wildlife and have power for wolves if we were part of the funding mechanism?
Well, was that more of a comment, or you mean you want?
No, I haven't found a way to value
Maybe Barry, maybe to like, let me see if this is right, rephrase your question. As non-hunting public, what can we do to, like you were saying with these agencies, what can like the non-extractive user, how would you think we'd best kind of reform these agencies when you were talking about your three-stool approach, if that makes sense?
Yeah, we want to participate, and we want our money directed to power so that we are full
Yeah.
participants.
Well, I guess I get what you're saying. Yeah, I'm completely sympathetic with what you're saying, because even though I'm a hunter, I'm not like, it was talked about earlier. I mean, we're not all the bad guys, and I don't have a voice anymore with my legislators either. It's just like I say, it's this recreation industrial complex. I mean, it doesn't matter what we say. I mean, these surveys I cited in Minnesota, I mean, roughly 80% of Minnesotans don't want wolves killed. Yet, if it wasn't for them being relisted again, they'd be killing them again this fall. So, I mean, it's a long, hard fight we got ahead of us.
Do we have another question for the speaker? Yes, great. Just want to give everybody a fair chance, Patricia.
I don't know if I really have a good question just for you, Barry. Maybe you can just try to explain, when you're talking to other hunters, why you oppose the wolf hunt.
Well,
Or to anyone as a hunter. That might help.
first of all,
bridge this.
because I am a hunter, so I'm rubbing, birds of a feather flock together. Most of the hunters I know don't approve of this wolf hunt. If they do, it's on a much more restricted level than what we're having right now. Well, they're having no impact on the deer herd for anything. We've got more deer. The golden age of deer hunting in Minnesota, we're in it. From 2000 up to 2015, the DNR will tell you the deer herd's been as high as 1.25 million. And it's been, last year they said it was 1 million, more deer than we've ever had. We were back in the 80s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, we had 10 to 12 deer per section. We're talking 20 to 30 deer per section now. Dr. Lee Freilich, forest ecologist from the University of Minnesota, says next to climate change, the greatest threat to our northern forests is an overpopulated white-tailed deer herd. So the wolves aren't, I mean, it isn't because, there's not that many deer because of wolves. It's because of our land practices, logging, making tree farms out of our forests. Wolves, what it is wolves are living sustainably with the population of deer out there. This Thielander, head of wildlife in DNR, said that there's the greatest wolf concentration in North America is in northern Minnesota, like we got too many wolves. We don't have too many wolves. They're living in perfectly harmony with the deer herd that we have. We could have more wolves and they wouldn't be impacting the deer herd. So I mean, it's deer hunting's been transformed more in the last 20 years than it has the last 200 years. The problem right now is a bunch of guys sitting on ATVs, not hunters that have any brains.
Okay.
Well, there's a certain, I don't know how, and to put it in words, but it's like, there's a different, with the wolf present, when you go out hunting, in the evening, when you hear some wolves howl, it's changed the whole landscape, the character of the land. Now we've got a mega predator out there, and it adds something, it takes us back, to those caves in France. We're part of that. It's a porthole, a window into our past. Jim Ham, who wrote the Boyer's Bible from Texas, came up here, he had a chance to hunt deer, bow hunt, over in the area where I live around Leech Lake, and he talked about how he was out hunting deer, and he heard wolves that night, and bemoaned the fact that no Texans will ever hear that. Wolves are valuable. They're more valuable to us alive than they are dead.
All right. Round of applause for Barry.